Go. Hey, everybody, welcome back. I'm Emily Moyer from Off Planet Radio, and Dani Katz from Words Are Matter is with me, and this is Words with Dani, and we're going to stick with the format we've been using of just not knowing what we're going to talk about and pre-showing as the show. I mean, we know sort of what we're going to talk about a little bit. But anyway, so Happy New Year to everybody. Today is the 2nd of January when we're recording this, and we are in a new year, a new cycle, and so we can change how we do things going forward. The energy is with us. So anyway, I mostly this morning, it's been a little crazy the last weeks with the holidays, and I've been in and out of this cold thing that keeps going away and coming back and all sorts of weird shit. So I've been a little bit negligent on keeping up with videos, so I kind of binge watched Dani's recent videos this morning, and there's a lot of stuff there. So we're just kind of going to start with that. And let's do a brief hit on the first two videos I mentioned, and then we can do the sort of deeper dive into the Adam Schiff thing. But so I started watching your video. It was from a couple of weeks back, but it was the one about Trump supporters, climate change deniers, and anti-vaxxers and all that kind of jazz, right?
Yeah.
And can you
Lovely
just
propaganda technique.
right? Can you just briefly sum up what that technique is a little bit? You don't have to go I'm going to link to the video here, guys, so that you guys can go watch the video. But just give a quick summary of that, because since we've all just been through holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, we've been around family members, and it's likely that one or more of you, probably all of you at some point, has been called one of these things by someone who, you know, is a family member or friend or whatever. And so I think this is kind of fresh in all of our minds, and how we change how we deal with this and respond to such accusations in the new year will be part of modeling better behavior.
Yeah, that was a great intro, Emily.
Oh.
Thanks for that. So yeah, the gist was just like all of us who are tuning in, I've noticed that whenever I express an alternative point of view, or I even question a dominant point of view, like I don't even profess any allegiance to an idea, I just question a dominant point of view, I'm immediately hit with one of these phrases. So the example that I pointed to in this conversation, or in this video that you're mentioning, was a friend of mine. We're completely opposite ends of the political spectrum. I'm an apolitical centrist. He's drinking the Kool-Aid leftist. So we were talking, and I mentioned something about the snow in Santa Fe, and he's like, oh, but climate change isn't real, right? And I said, yeah, you probably don't want to go there with me. And he said, oh, what, you're a climate change denier? And I just laughed because the name is so stupid. Like, there's nothing melodic about it. It doesn't flow. It's like totally clunky in the mouth. But I was just like, no, I'm your friend Dani. Like, because all I said was, let's not go there. And this is the propaganda technique, to slap this moniker on people. And then that moniker comes along with all the associations, right? Like, anytime I question like even the video that I just put out, which was explaining why Adam Schiff is actually going after impeachment. So from that, I've had people accuse me of being a Trump supporter. And it's like that, even like if you weren't living in this cultural climate, that would seem quite benign, right? I'm a Bernie supporter. I'm a Kennedy supporter. I'm a, Roosevelt supporter. But in this day and age, to be slapped with that moniker is almost career destroying for people who are running in the normie world, because the automatic associations that are tied to that propaganda are racist, homophobe, misogynist, Nazi. So this is the propaganda technique, is that if you express any opinion or idea that counters the dominant narratives, even if you're not aligning with them, you're just questioning, you're slapped with one of these monikers: Trump supporter, anti-vaxxer, climate change denier. And what it does is it allows people to put you in a box, slap all these negative associations on you, and then discount anything you have to say, any veracity, any facts, any sanity, any wisdom, because you've been labeled. It's like the yellow star that the Nazi would put on the Jews, or the pink triangle that would go on the gay people. It's the exact same thing. And it's a sign that says, dehumanize these people, discount anything they're saying. And it's a really unfortunate strategy. Like, this is the problem with the left, is that they're doing their oppressors' bidding for them by using these monikers and slapping them on people and shutting down sane discourse.
Well, and this goes to our friend Yuri Bezmenov, who is beginning to be censored from YouTube. It's interesting that, like, in the last few months, I've been talking about him, and all of a sudden these videos that have been there for a long time are starting to disappear. And I mean, they're still there, a lot of them, but there are some that are being pulled down. I'm not saying I'm responsible for it, but it's just tapping into that sort of feeling of what's going on at the moment. But okay, you hit on a couple of things there. And one of the things he talks about is the left being the useful idiots for the true Soviet subversion of America, which is different than Russiagate bullshit, right? Okay. And this name, so what in these final stages.
Do you want to differentiate what that is for the audience, just to be super clear?
Okay, so the Soviet infiltration, they recognized that the best way to do it was using, rather than like coming here and starting to shoot people, is to use, like, to practice Sun Tzu's art of war, which is use the natural flow and moves of your enemy to pin them to the wall, basically, right? To force them all the way with that move. And because we have a society where everything, or at least we did at one point, supposedly had a society where all kinds of speech and ideas were allowed, you can attach yourself to some of the naturally subversive ideas that were circulating through society, the ones that were not harmonious in nature. And there may be a few in there that were actually based on something moral and good, but most of them were degradations of an idea that once was, right? Once a movement has coalesced around something, it's already been debased generally, right? So basically, rather than invading with guns, right, which is what the people think war is, and so they don't recognize any other form of invasion, what you'd practice is subversion, right? And you basically debase society morally. You move them from a place of knowing things to not knowing things slowly over the course of a generation, right? About 15 to 20 years is the first stage of it, where you debase them ideologically and morally and all that kind of stuff. And then all this crap that we're seeing now is the result of that. So we finished that phase a while ago. And now what you're seeing here, and this is where you know that the left has been completely debased, is all they have left, the only weapon they have left in their arsenal is identity politics. And so what you are talking about is their attempt to enforce identity politics on people who are resisting it, right? So the left has divided itself into black, white people who support identity politics, who are called allies and stuff like that, I guess, right? They're called allies, like black, Latino, whatever, women, gay people, trans people, and then there's intersectionality, so where you have your, female, your black woman, queer, your disabled, tranny, Chinese person, or whatever. And the more of these factors you have, the more clout you have. It's the oppression Olympics. So the more oppressed you are, right, it's like, right, the more social currency you have. And so that's what they've been using to stratify themselves on the left. And the people who are more towards the center or to the right, or just seemingly sane in general, have resisted this mostly. And so you had certain kinds of attempts at first to do it in the same way. Like, they love when they can call somebody a white supremacist, a white nationalist, a self-hating Jew, or an anti-Semite. But because
you can't do the anti-Semite thing anymore if you're black, though.
Right. So, that only works so well, because we lived in a society where now there's other ways to stratify besides just race, which is their preferred method. But because that was resisted, now you have things like climate change denier, anti-vaxxer, Trump supporter, like right, that kind of stuff, right? Like, so it's the attempt to enforce their style of ideological stratification known as identity politics on people who are largely resisting that and are choosing to fight whatever's going on, or I don't like the word fight, but resist, or make their tactical move of what's going on based on actually knowing things, right? Right. It's a way of like demonizing knowing things. So the left used to be considered the intelligent knowing things side, and the right was more ideologically based, and things have completely switched. And that is the final, when you get to the end of the ideological subversion, right? Everything that was is now the opposite, and everything that people think is untrue. Like there was a quote, there's a quote, it's always on the bottom of my friend Elisa's emails from a former head of the FBI that said, our subversion program, which is the Soviet subversion program, we have been infiltrated by a Russian thing, but it was a Soviet thing and not this Russiagate shit. Right? That when everything the American people believe is untrue, we'll know our subversion program has been successful. Yes, we're there. Exactly. We've been there for a bit, and now we are just like swimming in like, it's just like, it's like the monster's ball of decadence of this like glorification of not knowing shit, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And that's the gist behind these terms and this propaganda is like, well, anything that any one of these people who's been slapped with one of these monikers says is automatically deemed false. So there's no need to listen. There's no need to look into it. It just completely shuts down the flow of truth and information. It's so ridiculous.
So by the end of this show, when we do our segment on Adam Schiff, I'll tie the bow on how Soviet subversion and Russiagate, how the trick that they're trying to employ here, either intentionally or just accidentally, that's how it works or whatever. But something you just said, what did you just say? You just said something that made me think of.
I was saying the use of these monikers shuts down the flow of information.
Oh, right. So it shuts okay. So one of the, if you go through all the gaffes that Joe Biden has made on his during his campaigning here, one of the things he says at one point is we prioritize truth over facts. And because there seems to have been a shift in what truth means, because now there's personal truth and lived experiences and my own truth and blah, 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 right? So now we rely on facts, but he's saying truth takes, like he was a slip, but he actually said what he really means. It wasn't really a slip. Right. Like, the thing we say is truth. It takes priority over facts. And one of the things that's happened, unfortunately, from the left, which used to be known as the more academic side, is that they now decide what facts are by consensus, and they call it science, which is really scientism. Like they call it, you poll scientists, and if most of the scientists agree, that is now science, as opposed to what the actual scientific experiment and process shows, which should be able to bear out what are facts or what things are known at this time. So they have replaced the scientific method with consensus science, which I call scientism. So the way that they prove climate change exists is by saying that 97% of scientists agree, right?
But that's not true.
It's not true.
Total bullshit.
It's 97% of the scientists that they're including in their study, which they handpicked them. Right?
Exactly.
Because there's plenty of climate scientists out there who say otherwise and who have been fired for their jobs because they went against what the consensus was, and the consensus is how they get their funding from government and corporations and all this kind of crap, right?
Of course. So
the left now believes in establishing truth or facts by consensus as opposed to what they actually are.
But here's the thing. The left doesn't even know that's what they believe, because at this point, the left is so ignorant. The left is so misinformed. The left doesn't understand that is how their so-called scientists or experts are compiling their information. The arrogance of the left ignorance is so outer limits at this point. So what you're saying is true, except they don't know that because they're so freaking ignorant.
Yeah. So here comes my warning to people against assuming that the answer to this is that the good place to be is on the right, right? And this is also the warning to people on the right that you guys are in this interesting space right now, because this is happening over here, and you have a chance to either recognize the bullshit of the entire system and step outside of it, because if not, in another 20 years, the not knowingness will swing back to your party. It's going to continually swing the pendulum from side to side, keep the herding the sheep from side to side, so they don't know that they've never actually left the pen, right? They're just continually move from one side to the other. So the point is to really leave the pen. So the right is in this place right now where they can choose to become integrous, right? I'm not saying there aren't people on both sides that are integrous. There are, right? But and the people who are finding their moment of being right, their glory, who happen to be on the right. This is where I encourage you to step out of the partisan issue step out of partisan facts and start looking at the fact that your side has made and continues to make a lot of mistakes as well, right? So one of the things that you know what Judicial Watch is?
Yes.
Okay. So they do a lot of great work, but I can't share any of their work with my dad because he sees them as a right-wing organization.
That's a problem that we have, is that a lot of these organizations that are associated with the right are putting out factual information, and people on the left won't even avail themselves to the facts because this partisan toxicity comes to discount anything right.
Right. So the other day I was listening to the Useful Idiots podcast with Matt Taibbi and Katie Halper, and they were making fun of Tom Fitton, but essentially saying that we need something like this is a good thing, but we need it to come from the left because the left are better people. And that doesn't really, Katie Halper said that, not Matt Taibbi. Matt Taibbi is interesting. Still think he's the most thoughtful of the journalists on the left.
I like Matt Taibbi.
Yeah. And he has never said anything that disqualifies him for me in terms of being a thoughtful individual with whom I could have a conversation. We just may disagree about what solutions are, but he hasn't debased truth and facts.
No, but this woman saying that the left is better, that's the problem with
the problem, right.
Everyone on the left thinks they're better and smarter.
But the right does too, for the most part, except for the people who are newly on the right because they became, secluded from the left, right?
Exactly.
So my thing here is, even though if you watch his videos, Tom Fitton does sometimes question why some of the cover-up that started in these departments under the Obama administration continues over in the Trump thing, right? Obviously, we know it's because of the deep state, but he does question why Trump isn't insisting something different be done. But that's not enough. What you guys really need to do to gain legitimacy and to make it so that your work is actually fighting the problem instead of just hiding your partisanship by going after the other side. Even you're using truth as a weapon, basically, when you're not looking at both sides of things. Go after. There's plenty of people on the right who who've done the same things as people on the left. It's just more obvious right now because of a weird political climate we're in. The corruption on the left is more obvious right now, right? Just like the corruption of the right was more obvious during the Bush administration. We have this weird thing now where Trump is an anomaly. Usually when there's a Democrat in office, the Republicans are telling the truth, and when there's a Republican in office, the Democrats are telling the truth. But we are outside of any kind of political norms right now, which is a glorious opportunity.
It's a beautiful opportunity, but one thing I'd like to drop in is that I think it's important is that the left seems to think that the right's all stoked on Trump and that he's their dude. And that's not actually the case. He's a wild card, and he's upsetting the
whole apple cart,
normal agenda. So to associate him with Republicans and the right in any traditional sense is off base.
Totally. My suggestion to people like Tom Fitton and other groups, even just some of these other groups that are activist groups like Turning Point and this and that and whatever, is if you want to really solidify yourself as truth tellers instead of just taking advantage of this opportunity where the truth happens to align with what you're saying to promote your ideology, then you need to you need to go after some of the bad actors who just happen to be on your own side. You need to file those
100%.
Same FOIA requests and whatnot. And one of the areas that both parties are guilty of, even though there's this confusing mess and shit, that is this influence that Israel has in our country, and this and the right's absolute love affair. I mean, it is almost impossible. There might be one or two, but they tend to be more to the libertarian wing, like Ron Paul was, of people on the right that you can ever get to speak out against the politics and the government of Israel and the ideology of Zionism, right? On the left, they always talk about this anti-Semitism that's going on the left. It isn't really.
Anti-Semitism doesn't really have dick to do with Israel or Zionism. It has to be separated.
Right. And even within that, there's a lot of people on the left who do this weird thing where they support all of the sort of grossest parts of Israel, but then also claim to care about Palestinian rights. And they're the ones that the people on the right say, oh, these people are anti-Semitic. But if you look back, they both took the AIPAC money. They both took the, you know what I mean? Like,
Right.
this is one area where some things could be exposed, but there's plenty of others. Like, there's plenty, just, if you really want to move truth forward as like the proper ideology from which we view government, then you cannot use truth as a weapon just to go after the people on the other side, right? Go after them by all means, but you got to be, if you really want to be seen as like a moral actor in this, you have got to go after the side that maybe is more to your political liking in terms of how a government should be run. But if we're exposing corruption or lying or inconsistency, we have to expose it on both sides because it's always happening on both sides.
100%, and I think that's why Tim Pool is so awesome. But I think one thing is, like, it might be naive to assume that these people are that devoted to truth above their own ideology of their own world. I don't see that very much. And the other thing, as far as like what you're saying about the left's perspective on Israel and Zionism, is that, and granted, there are exceptions across the board.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the people I know who align with the right are very educated about politics, government, world events. They know what's going on. Most of the people I know on the left who are so passionate about it are passionate because it's trendy, because it's the cool thing to be into, because all cool people,
like, they've never actually read the Constitution and stuff like that.
Actually know what they're talking about. So they're just doing what whoever they follow on Instagram is telling them to do as regards to what they're supposed to think about Israel or Zionism. You're actually understand what's going on.
I agree with that. I agree with just pretty much everything you just said there, except for I find Tim Pool, I struggle to listen to Tim Pool because everything he says, he immediately unsays with the next thing that he says. And I find it confusing for people who are trying to understand the political landscape. Like, if you really are nuanced and, particular in your parsing out of facts, you can weave your way through it and see what's going on. But like, at some point you have to actually believe in something, right? You actually have to be like, you know what? Like, everything he says is just as awful, but I don't know, maybe that he always does that.
But he doesn't seem like, and again, I'm not.
And I like a lot of things Tim Pool does, but I struggle with the way he presents information. Sorry, go ahead.
I don't think he's apolitical the way you and I are. I think he identifies as a Dem still. So my sense is that he's still working it out, and that's why I respect him, because even as someone who's identified as a Dem, unless I have that wrong, like, I love that he called out Adam Schiff's bullshit for like having that journalist wiretapped and all of that. Like, so given that he does seem to be allied with truth, and he's also young. While he's also figuring out what it means to be a Democrat. I don't know if he's unraveling that.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? But he seems a little more steeped in the system than you and I are.
Yes.
And I think that colors his confusion.
Well, he's also still trying to maintain credibility as a journalist amongst his peers who are partisan. So he still is very afraid of conspiracy, and he is still trying to, I agree with you. I think we're watching somebody sort of work it out publicly. And at a certain point, I hope he just is like, this is ridiculous. You know what I mean? And figures it all the way out. But I do think he does a lot of great things. I still think a hugely important moment was the way he went after Jack Dorsey and Vijaya on the Joe Rogan podcast.
Oh my God. Yeah. I just got a chill remembering that.
Yeah, that was him at his best. And he was actually
absolutely was.
Yeah, and he actually, and this is going to sound insane and crazy, but he was interviewed by Glenn Beck on Glenn Beck's podcast. Mm-hmm. And while I disagreed with at least 50% of what he said, he presented in a manner that wasn't what he does on his own videos where he's waffling back and forth. And I was like, this is good. Like, I disagreed with some things, but like, this is like, okay, this is a better picture of like a more clear message that a person who is still working it out can sort of give. You know what I mean? It was pretty good. It was a while back. Anyway, so How did we get to where we are?
Okay, so we were talking about the video where I was talking about the propaganda behind those names. And just to tie that up really quickly, what it does is like when my friend said, "Oh, you're a climate change denier," and I was like, and I was reminding him much the way like a kidnapping about to be murder victim would remind the potential assailant, like, "No, I'm your friend Dani." Like I was reminding him, like, "No, I'm a person with humanity that you care about," because what those I keep using the word moniker, and it's such a like weird, antiquated word, but
but it's true.
But what those labels do is they dehumanize, and they make it so that, oh, these aren't people anymore. These aren't complex, multidimensional humans. They're the enemy, and therefore I can do terrible things to them.
Yeah. It just dehumanizes them completely. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so speaking of dehumanizing, one of the other thing you need to do to a human to dehumanize them is censorship, to censor them, right? And you had just a very brief video in your your cute pink glasses that you use for Kriyas, but that people, probably other people thought were just part of some weird fashion statement. I think somebody called them your gummy bear sunglasses. I thought that was cute.
I have another pair right here.
Those are the rose. Are those rose or
yeah? Golden? These are the rose pink. I'm right they're color therapy glasses.
Yeah. No, for everybody out there, like go out there and look at the sky with the various colors of glasses on, and you will see different things at each color spectrum. And then, but really, the most important thing is to not wear sunglasses on a regular basis. When I stopped wearing sunglasses, I started perceiving everything going around me completely differently. And then and I just noticed that, and I didn't think anything of it. And when I was told that to a friend, he was like, "Oh yeah, he stopped wearing sunglasses when he found out about the lens conspiracy." I was like, "What? This was like a conspiracy I didn't know about." So almost this is kind of like the media shit, right? The 6 corporations own all the media.
Right.
95% of the sunglasses lenses, whether they're expensive glasses or cheap ones, are manufactured by Ray-Ban. Why do you have one company manufacturing all the lenses? They're filtering out a certain band, right? And like that is fucking with people's perception of reality. And I stopped wearing sunglasses because I broke or lost mine, and I was like, I'm not going to buy an in-between pair because I end up wasting a lot of money that way. I'm waiting till I find a pair I totally love, right?
Oh, I only have in-between pairs because I lose them so much.
Yeah, and so I I don't like the cheap in-betweens, so my in-between ones end up being like $50 or $60, and I should just wait and buy the $120 ones when I find the right one or whatever. But I never ended up buying them because I got used to no sunglasses and decided I liked it better, and that my worldview, my view of myself became more cohesive and in a way that I can't really give word to. But when I found out about that thing with Ray-Ban, like, why are people who are buying cheap lenses getting the same lenses as people who are buying expensive glasses?
Exactly.
Right? Unless it's all about so just like everything else in this world, everybody's eating the same shit sandwich. It's just one is expensive and one is on Wonder Bread and one is on crusty French baguette, but or gluten-free almond flour bread or something like that, whatever it is. Right. So anyway, so your video about censorship. So you talked about this a little bit. You just kind of hinted at this last time we talked. Now you've separated from that situation, so maybe you just want to explain a little bit what happened there.
Yeah.
I'll link to the video as well.
Okay, cool. Thanks. Yeah, I did bring it up on our last show, and I have a new angle on it, so I appreciate you bringing it up. What had happened was I had this fun gig writing for a rom-com podcast, short scripts, 5 acts, and I would pitch them to the editor, and once the pitch was approved, I'd go ahead and write the script, and they were loving what I was doing. So I pitched a series of 3 scripts on wanderlust, and they were all about like these romances happening while people were traveling. And I pitched, so again, ahead of time, I let them know what I was planning on write. I pitched a story which was based on a real story from my life. And the gist was like this Jewish American princess is backpacking around Costa Rica. She meets a Nicaraguan refugee who lives under a tree, uses a banana leaf as a wallet, speaks in a very thick patois accent. And despite all perceived cultural class differences, they have a genuine connection and they have a romance. This really happened. So I pitched this. The lead character's name is Jamal. I made it clear he had a thick Caribbean accent. I was assigned the story. I wrote the script, And I went through a ton of effort to make sure that the patois was really accurate and that I was getting the dialect.
Which that is actually the culturally sensitive thing to do, is if you're going to comment on a culture, get it right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like, I was referencing several different tabs. I have friends and a whole, crew in Costa Rica, and I would send them emails like, is this what someone would say? Is this correct? Like, I was really, really respectful about it. Anyway, so the editor said that they were rejecting my script because of cultural insensitivity. And I was like, what was culturally insensitive about it? He said, you can't write in that dialect. Because I was like, I'm so naive, right? I'm like, but it's a beautiful love story. Like, there's nothing culturally insensitive about it. He's like, well, you wrote it in a dialect and you're white. And I was like, oh, so if Mark Twain culturally, racially insensitive when he wrote Huck Finn? And he said, yes. This is an English teacher in his 50s who actually said yes to that question, and he wasn't being facetious. So the whole thing blew up. They told me that they weren't taking any more scripts for the rest of the year, and they had to regroup and see how to handle this. And I was like, right? And I'm like, okay, so do I still have a job with you guys? And he's like, I don't know. He's like, we're not taking any more scripts for the rest of the year, which turned out to be a lie, because a friend who I'd put in touch with them ended up getting an assignment from them the following week, and I coached him through the whole thing. So I was like, okay, he's lying to me. And then I was like, and the editor is my friend. So I said, okay, well, where are we at as far as our friendship? And he's like, I don't know. I can't go there right now. I'll call you next week. This was 3 weeks ago. I haven't heard from him.
I'm sorry, I'm laughing at your pain. I'm not laughing at your pain, but it's just like, this is crazy.
It's crazy
like,
to me.
you're actually, the fact that you could have a deep connection and romance with somebody who you almost couldn't communicate with in words is a testament to the fact that you are open to all kinds of human connection and actually have no racial bias.
And I thought, and that was
so racial sensitivity is now racial bias.
Oh,
that's how backwards we are. So cultural and racial respect and sensitivity is now implicit bias.
Hold up, it gets worse. He said to me, he goes, well, you could take another stab at it, but instead of her having her hook up with a local, you could just have her hook up with another expat who's traveling, who's white. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm being racially insensitive? Now you're telling me that you'll take it as long as it's not an interracial thing? And he said, well, Dani, it's just so edgy. It's just too out there to get people to be on board with an expat traveler hooking up with a local. And I was like, but I'm the one with the racial insensitivity problem. And what I'm realizing across the board, because I put together 3 incidences of different sort of SJW types accusing me of racism, and the through line across all of them is that they're fucking racist. They are not dealing with it. And so their way of not dealing with it is to create dumb rules and try to impose them and silence other people so that they don't ever have to look at themselves. And then the other piece, just while I'm on my little rant, as I sat with it more and more and more, as far as why my friend won't talk to me anymore, his boss is 25. So who right? Her brain hasn't even stopped developing. She is quite literally, by definition, still a child in the development process. And I'm getting really sick and tired of Gen Xers swallowing their truth and swallowing their integrity to sign on to these children's stupid censorship games. It's so out of integrity, and that type of cowardice is really not helping the situation. And I'm starting to get, like, only a couple weeks ago, I was like, that's okay. It's not everyone's dharma to speak their truth. And some people, they have kids and they have to protect their jobs. And where I'm at now, fuck that. Everyone needs to start speaking their truth and standing up to this.
Yeah.
Because we're letting the children drive the ship into the bottom of like a dark, craggy pit filled with like sharks and knives and terrible things.
Yeah, and what we're just saying goes to our first part of the conversation, where with them them creating these rules so that they don't have to face their shit is the same as calling somebody a climate change denier so that they don't have to do research into what the science actually says. So it accomplishes the same task. So you can dismiss the whole world of information with one sharp stabbing statement or rule.
Exactly. And it's all being done with these words: climate change denier, racial insensitivity, like these pithy little dumb phrases.
You know what my sorry, go ahead.
They just allow people to be stupid and out of integrity and do the bidding of their slave owners.
You know what word when I hear, I'm just done. I just completely tune out when I hear something. No, problematic.
Oh.
When somebody says, I find your behavior problematic, or that idea is problematic, or that position is problematic, I'm like, oh, fuck, here we go, dude.
Oh, okay.
Go look how many times that's used in the kinds of stuff we're talking, especially when it comes to like privilege and race and this kind of, cultural sensitivities and this, that, and the other. Like, I got into an argument with my sister over her. What are these things? So maybe, and as we are moving into the new year here, also, Dani and I, we haven't figured out how yet. We're going to evolve some of the things that we're going to do, but there may become some discussion with the listeners portion or some kind of thing of this going forward. And people have requested, and I think each of us have also felt this need to like have a conversation larger than just between the two of us about what to do when your loved one calls you racist, or what it feels like, or the madness that ensues in terms of vocabulary parsing that or whatever when you get called the R word. So that may be some stuff like that may be coming soon. So anyway,
I think these days problematic means you're not on board with the bullshit I'm spewing and I'm uncomfortable.
Yeah. And I'm going to use a word that makes me sound very smart and morally superior.
Four syllables.
Right, yeah. Right. So it used to have to be at least 5 or 6 to make somebody feel inferior, but because we've contracted our comfort zone, we've also contracted our vocabulary. So now it only requires 4 syllables to debase somebody morally. Yes. Anyway, all right. So I think we are good on that one, and then we'll move on to the big kahuna, which was you had this awesome. We're just talking about Dani's videos today because they were really good, and they're issues that are coming up. It isn't just to pump up Dani's ego, although that's the side effect I don't mind. But these are just they were. I was listening to them this morning. I was like, this is the stuff to talk about for the show, because the Adam Schiff thing got some views, but it needs to get more views. Okay, so I loved the way you started the video, and I will link to that here as well, by identifying yourself as a native Angelino. We don't want to be cisgender insensitive. I don't understand it. Right? So I really liked that. Cause obviously I identify as a native Angelino. We were born in the same place, and I have not lived in the hills where you live, but I kind of like the way you sort of set that mood of considering yourself to be a guardian of that magical spiritual part of Los Angeles that has been both used for light and dark, right? So I kind of like that in the whole the way you just sort of set that in motion about what you're feeling, what happened when the 5G tower showed up in your neighborhood. Now, my personal experience thus far with 5G is a little bit different. But it doesn't matter. We don't all have to have the same thing. What you're talking about is important. And it is it's becoming very clear through the technologies and who's involved with what technologies and what political ideas or ideologies or pushes, that there are certain characters in our political comedy show that are charged with being the guardian or the custodian with the implementation of a certain kind of brave new world, right? Or whatever. And that this, Adam Schiff is the congressman from 5G, from China, basically, or from 5G, or the congressman from Huawei, right? And so I'm going to link to this, and everybody should go watch the video. And also, when you watch the video, look at the links that Dani provides there. Dani is a real journalist and a real researcher. She doesn't do this like intuitive free association that I do. Both systems are valid. But for those of you who like more evidence and proof than I can ever, I just am usually going with sort of my inner knowingness with things, which is my way of winding through the world. And Dani is really good at digging up facts because she just has more patience to sit still partly than I do. And she likes it. You like that. You know what I mean? You really like to dig in that. And I like to use a combination of digging. I used to do more digging and free association,
I don't mean to interrupt, but there's a story about why it rolled that way.
Yeah.
Because and I appreciate what you were saying about the beginning of the video, because on this end, I'm like, I wonder if I should have cut out that spiritual stuff because so many people have issues with that. But then part of me is tired of the like Sam Harris point of view and that like Joe Rogan making fun of chicks with crystals. And I'm like, fuck it. I'm a witch. This is how I roll. Like, people just need to deal with it. But what had happened was they put and I know we all have different experiences with 5G, but they put the 5G pole less than a block away from my house. So I was living in very extreme close relations. And what happened was I was calling my city councilman and calling my senator and calling the mayor. And everyone I called to was just like leading me to Adam Schiff. Like, yeah, we don't have any power. It's all up to Schiff. It's all up to Schiff. It's all up to Schiff. So that's how I put that piece together. And then ultimately, like what was happening to my body and my psyche and all of it was too much. And I left LA. So I did medicine ceremonies over the solstice, and I spent the second night of ceremonies healing. I don't want to speak to the specifics that happened to my body. I'm just guided not to, but like I spent the bulk of the second night healing my body, and the medicine was showing me this is all 5G. This is 100% 5G. And it was the medicine that said, you need to do a video talking about your experience, explaining how it led to Adam Schiff, and you need to find actual substantial links to prove it. And I was like, shit, medicine, like you're giving me a major assignment here. And what was kind of frustrating about the task was that like I don't have any visuals on like paychecks or bank transfers from Huawei. I don't have any hard evidence. Interesting was that everyone I spoke to in this realm, and you gave me some really good leads, and Sally gave me some really good reads, and I talked to a bunch of independent journalists. 100% across the board was like, duh, we know he's in bed with Huawei. We know he's on the payroll, and I don't have any way to prove it. So I did the best I could of putting all the pieces together. It seems super, super obvious.
My guess, I have an answer for you. And this is some intuitive knowingness, but just I've seen this all before. I would say he's not on the payroll. I'd say they have dirt on him. I would say
there's so much baby fucking dirt.
Right, that's what I'm saying. I would say that their technology probably brownstone him, captured him doing something, right? Either their technology captured it or somebody else did, and then it's just being used this way. I'd say this is not a man. I'm sure they coat his pockets as well, right, on a certain level because they in some way. But I don't think he's actually getting a paycheck. I think this is a man, the desperation he is insisting on so many levels on an anti-human agenda tells me that they have got him by every single hair that is growing off of each one of his testicles, and they're pulling each hair in a different direction.
Exactly. It's like whether he's on the payroll or he's being blackmailed, he's doing Huawei's bidding there's no other reason for him to put 5G in LA on such a wide scale when we know it's not safe.
So, I mean, if you look at all of his stuff, like some of it, so he's okay. So we're going to get into fancy stuff here with the impeachment process. So he's leading the charge on impeachment. And he's been
pathetically, by the way, like it's such a joke how badly he's doing it, and anyone even buys into it is ridiculous.
Well, same on the Russiagate thing. He would go on people's shows and say he had proof, but never show it, and he's bumbling and fumbling around. But the point is, he's extending the charade.
Correct.
So he's extending
anything to get the dude in the Oval out of the way from the Chinese communist agenda. It seems like that's his role.
Okay, so look at his, so he has a few things that he's really into. It's anti-Trump. So, it's anti-Trump. It's so there's almost every person in the government is really into surveillance. There's like a few who aren't, but like they're all really into surveillance, you know, mostly because there's only a few that can be found that haven't done some dirty, shady shit that they don't want to be found out, right?
Right.
So, okay, so he's in charge of just doing the delay and the distract and the whatever, right. and whether that is Russiagate or impeachment or whatever. So he's in charge of that in terms of like what goes on in Washington, D.C., right? Yeah, then he's charged with this implementation of 5G. He's charged with censoring any voices against vaccines and also trying to push legislation that mandates vaccines. He's promoting a vegan diet. He's a vegan and he promotes a vegan diet. Right. Okay. He says
he's vegan. He does promote a vegan. If he's vegan or not.
Right. Okay. But we have to always remember that he's being mind controlled too. So he is the victim of everything he's proposing as well. That is generally how this stuff works. Okay. The people that we never see maybe aren't getting vaccinated or aren't whatever, right? Like that. But the people who are doing the bidding, the minions, the handlers, all that kind of stuff, they're all under mind control too.
Right. Well, and also from the deep research that I did do, there's mass consensus that he's quite dumb.
He looks dumb. And he looks like a ventriloquist doll. Like he's not doing the talking. It's just coming through him, right? Like it's just coming out of his mouth, right. And he's just, yeah.
Perfect minion of something larger, nefarious force because he's not operating.
Yeah. Right. His district includes Long Beach, where the Chinese owned the port until just recently, or something.
Obama sold them.
Sold them, right? But that's where a lot of the child trafficking, organ trafficking, all of that comes through, right? Yep. So.
And the dude in the Oval just pulled that out of Chinese control.
Okay, so a couple of things. So first of all, the level of control over our physiological systems that needs to be attained in order to have the kind of Internet of Things type control over us that is desired by whatever golem sits behind the Huawei, as well as other corporations. It's not just Huawei that's doing it.
Right.
Okay. But that's the team he's on.
Yeah.
It requires them to be inside of our bodies, right, without our knowledge.
Yep.
And so that includes 5G, which is not just damaging in all the ways you described, including the whole thing with the sugar explosions and all that kind of stuff, right?
And all the mind control programs.
But it's also a military technology called active denial, right, which can be used to literally turn somebody off. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that is right. So it's an active denial system. It does all the things you've talked about. It pulls together a lot of different kinds of frequency and wave technology possibilities. We talked about the sugar and how it relates to that kind of programmable matter and creating. It basically turns sugar into explosive time crystals, right?
Yes. By the way, most of the videos that I reference in my video, which were various DARPA researchers talking about the mind control programs that they were developing to put through 5G, have been pulled from the web.
Of course. And DARPA also funded the research at Brown University about using sugar molecules as thumb drives. So programmable sugar molecules is programmable matter, basically, right? So all roads lead to DARPA as far as that. Okay, so that's access to the body that way. Vaccinations are another way of accessing the body. Making sure that there are certain sort of metals and certain kinds of destructive enzymes and things like that are inside and preservatives and weird stuff with basically like embalming.
Surveillance chips.
I think it's more. I don't think they have. I think they like to keep us waiting for a chip because it makes us not as concerned about the waves and the frequencies and the fact that we already have a chip that we just keep right outside of our body, not actually in our body. Right. So I think the chip. Not that it isn't on any level a thing, but I think it's a great fear tool. And while everybody's saying, oh, well, it's not the chip yet, so I'm not worried, all this other stuff is happening, right? So that, and then the reason nobody can speak about anti-vax kind of stuff is because you can't Schiff won't let them, and right, this whole kind of thing like that. Vegan diet.
It's great to me that no one questions questions the fact that that is a law, that it's illegal to write about anything that is not pro-vax in our media. Why is that not alarming to anyone? I don't get that.
Well, because everybody's under mind control from the waves and the sugar, right? It creates apathy, just like we get, right? Okay. So then he's promoting a vegan diet, which the UN is also promoting, right? And with some of the research I'm doing right now and things I'm learning in my nutritional pursuit, that there are certain kinds of cholesterols and fats and enzymes and things like that that can only be gotten from animal protein that is important in the separation, like in your cell walls and keeping the right things on the right, which side of the cell wall, right? Mm-hmm. And there's certain things that, like, even if you can get such and such mineral or such and such vitamin or such and such a thing from, it's different when it's from an animal source than when it's from a plant source. And in this construction of some of these separate, I'm not super good on some of this technical stuff. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a nutritionist. I'm a nutritional consultant. I'm really good at helping you get to where you want to be with your body, but I sometimes struggle to use the right language for the science. And so I'm doing the best I can here. So
you're doing a bang up job.
Okay. So there's a certain, like, it's just different when it comes from an animal source of fat than when it comes from a vegetarian source of fat, right? Like, I'm not trying to tell anybody that an animal diet is better than a vegan diet or that you can't be healthy as a vegan. There's just certain functions that work differently. It's kind of like, you know, when you have one brand of contact lens or another with the same prescription, it feels different slightly. Right? Okay. So it could be something, this is not a moral judgment, but the fact of the matter is, if the UN is pushing a vegan diet, I have to ask what.
Exactly. Like, that's right? It. If the UN is pushing it, then it's suspect.
And some of these things that are being promoted as like really important parts of the vegan diet, like the impossible meat and all this kind of stuff, which is absolutely like, no one should ever eat that, no matter what.
No.
Right. The fact that these things are being invented tells you that they understand that the humans eventually will have a desire for meat. And so they're giving you a substitute for that. And if your body's desiring it, it's not going to be satisfied with the substitute. In fact, it's likely going to make it sicker. And the things that they have to do to that substitute to try and get it to imitate, it's just, ugh. Whatever it is. This is not a moral judgment about veganism or carnivorism or anything like that. But there are certain things that happen with the cell wall that need at least a small amount of animal fat for it to be the guardian of what stays on one side and what goes into the other. And with these frequencies, we're talking about penetrating your body, penetrating your cells, and using them for different things, right? And so you want to have people with all the crap in their bodies and from the vaccines. You want to have them eating a vegan diet, right? And you want them full of sugar, and you want the 5G to be hitting this, and it's making everybody, you know, basically part of the Internet of Things, right? Which Huawei is using to spy on everybody and to control things, okay? Now, where I would disagree with you is, I don't think that the dude in the Oval is fighting 5G.
No, wait, I gotta stop you, because I never said the dude in the Oval is fighting 5G, and the responses that I've gotten from my video are people sending me stuff telling me that he's pro-G. I didn't say that he isn't.
Right.
5G is bigger than Huawei.
Yeah, totally. And
way bigger than Huawei. And all I was talking about was Adam Schiff's motivations in getting the guy out of the Oval. But
yes.
No part of me ever proposed that the guy in the Oval is anti-5G. He's not.
Okay.
Unless he's playing some crazy 5D chess.
No.
Pushing it.
He's playing 5G chess, but not 5D chess.
And
Donald Trump.
Really quick, I just want to jump on the vegan thing. Notice how many shows Joe Rogan has done recently with athletes who are subsisting on a vegan diet, and how
he's changing his opinion on.
Right?
Yeah.
So as soon as you mentioned that from the book that you'd read, and then I'd read that Adam Schiff was vegan, and then the Joe Rogan thing, I'm like, oh yes, of course.
Yeah, Joe Rogan is slowly backpedaling on his criticism of veganism, and he's using I listened to that interview with James Wilkes and Chris Kresser. That James Wilkes guy was like listening to me back when I used to be a tweaker. You know what I mean? It was just like pots and pans. You know what I mean? Like, I couldn't even stand. It's like you're as hungry.
Rarely work with him when he gets the two opposing.
Yeah.
Like, those are always the worst shows, minus the Tim Pool, Jack Dorsey.
Yeah. Yeah, but it was just unlistenable. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
so
yeah,
it was
I
unlistenable.
tried as well, and I was like, I can't
Yeah,
listen to propaganda.
and then I did go watch that guy's documentary though. I watched the day before. I watched the Magic Pill, which is a keto documentary, and then I watched the Game Changers, which is a vegan documentary. And I was like, if you subscribe to one or the other of these positions completely, it's like watching MSNBC or Fox News. You're living in completely different worlds with completely different sets of facts, and this it's also an ideological separation. Like our diet choices have become political as well.
Exactly, it's the same thing. It's like, it's not that you eat what your body wants. It's I am a vegan.
Yeah.
I am paleo. You create an identity around it versus like, what does my body need today?
Yeah. Yep. So, okay. So then my thing is that this is really a fight for who will rule 5G, right? Because Donald Trump isn't anti-surveillance or anti-control over everything. He just wants to make sure that his friends in America, it's a Western empire as opposed to a multipolar or he's not opposed to a corporate empire or a Western empire. He's opposed to a multipolar world or a world, because if you notice, like, he's not really against stealing the oil. He just he always is for stealing the oil, right? Like, he just wants to make sure that if there's going to be oil gotten, that he gets it or that America gets it.
Right.
If there's going to be
he needs to win. He wants America to be leading the 5G thing.
Or him. Like, he's not for freedom. He's for certain custodianship of the tyranny, right? So he's not opposed to all of the, like, I don't think he's opposed to 5G on a health or freedom front. He's opposed to it on, we can't let China have this much control over our economics and all this kind of stuff. And one of the things,
also, he doesn't need to be giving China all of our dirt. He'd rather be the one collecting our dirt.
Yeah, and also this is where were different kinds of communist subversion deployed. We talked about Soviet subversion earlier. Right. The way that the communist Chinese have tried to subvert America, and in some ways have done more masterful. It's different because we've been subverted by both. Is they invaded America with plastic crap, right? Mm-hmm. So, like, the way they've made us financially dependent on them by basically Walmart and plastic crap that Americans are dependent on, and so they have control. Like, if Walmart has an intelligence agency, basically, and a paramilitary force ready to fight if people start to say we don't want to have any more plastic shit from China. You know what I mean? They have all this kind of stuff. Right. I don't know if you heard this was several years back, but they were talking about at some point, like, that eventually everything that was sold in Walmart or everything that came from China, the plastic stuff, would all have a chip in it. So it could be tracked from destination to where it finally ended.
Thought so many times about shit from Amazon as well. Like, I got these earrings from Amazon a couple years ago, and I'm like, are they tracking me? Do they have a chip in them?
Right. So the same kind of thing. Like, I would say, like, similar, right? But, you know, like, so Chinese surveillance and China has also come in and funded in the, like, since, like, the late 90s or 2000s, some entertainment in the United States, just like the Soviets did maybe back early. There's all different kinds of ways of doing it, right? Like, Chinese haven't tried to.
Chinese distribution is a big part of what, like Hollywood will change its content to make China happier so that they can have all that distribution money.
That's what I'm talking about. So, the Soviet used
it's a different way of controlling us.
Right. Soviet did ideological through academic ideas and things like that, right? That through invading the universities and the cultural left. The way that the Chinese did it was more of an economic, goods-based invasion. Yeah. Okay. And so, like, that's what's really happening here is, so Donald Trump does some stuff. Okay. So this is where it gets complicated, is that, like, okay, so, like, it's a good thing he's fighting Huawei, right? But that is not the same as, like, 5G, like, he's preventing 5G from coming to, 5G.
Like, no part of me said that.
Yeah. No, you just to be clear, you didn't say that, but, like, I think some people who either are reactionaries on the left or who want to believe Trump is perfect on the right could perceive from the way the video is that, like, that Trump was doing a heartfelt thing.
way that like Ray-Ban is making all of the sunglasses and that's distorting our perception, that's what Trump derangement syndrome does to people. I explain this is why Adam Schiff is actually impeaching the dude in the Oval, and then everyone goes to tell me why the dude in the Oval is a scumbag, and I'm like, I wasn't saying he wasn't, and I'm not saying he is, but it's just like, it's whatever that virus is, people need to go there.
Yeah. So all that, and then, you know, Adam Schiff also has this little kids thing, right? Which is that he has this charity called Little Kids that's about learning to massage infants, which, you know, this is part of.
Oh my God! Really?
It's kind of like the lady who started Amber Alert was the one who trafficked the children from Haiti. Like, it's the same thing.
There is so much shit on the web about him being a pedophile. Like,
well, that's why Donald Trump calls him Little Adam Schiff, because his charity is called Little Kids. Mm-hmm. And it's spelled Liddle, Little. That's what Donald Trump calls him, Little, right? So one of the things now, and this is going to get into like a little bit, you might be able to appreciate some of this. So part of what goes along with the pedophilia and the baby eating and all this stuff, it's also connected to organ harvesting and trafficking, which the Chinese are really into. Right?
Hugely into.
And that's, I think, a lot of what was going on there in Long Beach. And one of the things.
Much of what must have been going on in Long Beach.
He's running that thing too. Like this whole, where the pedophilia and the organ harvesting and trafficking kind of comes across.
And of course he'd want to get the dude in the Oval out when he knew that he was going to shut down the Long Beach port, which is the throughway for all of these kids and and whatnot.
So it goes also to, so in China, they persecute people who practice Falun Gong.
Yeah.
Right? And those people get either imprisoned or killed, and then they harvest their organs, either while they're alive or when they're dead. Because, and you can speak to this maybe even more than me as a person who's actually had, well, I guess I could say too, but you've been more maybe aware or intentional with it. Modifications occur to your body due to certain spiritual practices that may be similar to what people who practice Falun Gong, why their bodies are healthy. Right?
Absolutely.
Like, you know, so like Dani didn't always have this space in her teeth, right? Dani you've had internal things shift based on certain sort of meditative and breathing practices and all this kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, exactly. I was chanting in Sanskrit for like all day, every day for a year when this started to grow in 2009. Yeah.
So, you know, the Falun Gong, the persecution of Falun Gong, well, sure, the surface level story is that this subverts the control of communism because it's a belief in something outside of the government. The probably more true disgusting nature is the corporate oligarchs in China want the organs of the people who are practicing Falun Gong. And that would be the same as these old creepy fucks here in the United States who, you know, are probably stealing the organs of some of these children that are, you know, used as in sex trafficking and whatever, and, you know, to prolong their own lives. I mean, that's, you know, like, that's the other side of this that doesn't get talked about enough, is how, you know, once they steal their innocence, they also steal their organs. If they're not put to work as sex slaves, then their body parts are taken and done all these things with. And I think that Long Beach port was where a lot of this stuff comes together.
I think so. I think so
right. I'm using a certain amount of my own free association and intuition and stuff here. I don't have the evidence trail for all of this, but I've observed long enough, and like once you've seen the same, I'm pretty good at pattern recognition.
Exactly.
And then this whole thing, and this is where we're going to tie the bow around what we started with, the difference between Soviet subversion and Russiagate insanity, right? Is you now have this situation where we're presented with this bullshit idea of our Russian collusion, or how the Russians have invaded by controlling our election and getting Donald Trump president, which on one level isn't true, but on another grander level is, right? So like this invasion and subversion has been happening for 50 years, and it happened through the left. But the way that they're trying to present it is something that just happened now, and it's the fault of all those on the right.
Yeah.
Right? So when people believe the inverse of truth, our subversion program is complete.
Yeah.
So The Russians invaded and gave us Donald Trump through influencing the minds of the right, instead of they've subverted an entire country away from the thing that they were founded on into this bullshit craziness we live in, right? So the blame is it's gonna look like that's the whole thing, right? Yeah. So and there's the people who got subverted are never going to have a moment of self-reflection, because the way it's going to be presented in history was that it was the right through this thing that happened at the very end of it. The subversion program is over. They're tying a bow off and saying we have been invaded by both Chinese and Russians. There's been a communist takeover. They don't really care which one gets credit. Right. The point was to subvert the freedom-loving, free-thinking, entrepreneurial spirit of the West, right? And instead of recognizing that this has happened, everybody's fighting over, right, left, silly nonsense, what bathroom should we go, and blah, blah. It's perfect. Nobody even knows they've been subverted.
Absolutely not. Do you think there will, at any point, be a historical reckoning where the left will be faced with how they've been used?
Well, I mean, it depends. Like, some people would say, well, no, because they're getting ready to do like a Tartarian mud flood style reset where they totally rewrite history. Right. And so there'll be none of that. But I mean, I don't know, because the problem with this is that we also live in the most overindulged, spoiled point in history. Right. And so there's not been a cost to this. The truth of the matter is even though people think that we live in this horribly depraved place, the economy is pretty good. Right. Like the
economy is booming.
I mean, how much mind control are you under when you're not poor, but you're running around saying you are? Right.
That's like everyone in the States.
Right. So I'm not saying that
as someone pays $20 for a tonic at Erewhon or whatever.
Right. So I'm not saying that there isn't economic disparity and things going on. There shouldn't be. There's a kernel in truth in all of these kinds of things. I'm not saying that we are as prosperous as we should be able to be, because we've been taught that prosperous has to do with money and not with life experiences and enriching, relationships and all of that kind of stuff. But the fact of the matter is none of the people whose financial portfolio, my friend Leo always says this, has improved, whose 401k has grown under the Trump administration, is willing to give that up in protest. Right? So, as long as... But
what would they even be protesting?
Right, like basically saying that my ideological beliefs are more important than my pocketbook. So as protest and saying that money isn't the most important thing, I'm going to refuse my gains that have been made during the Trump administration.
I mean, that's like the biggest hypocrisy of the left, that every Democratic candidate on that stage
is a millionaire,
a bajillionaire with multiple homes, whose children have only ever gone to private school.
Yeah.
And don't know anything about what it's like to live like the rest of us plebes.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, pretty much. So, right, and the one person that maybe could fall into that category is, of course, smeared as a Russia lover, right? Oh, and an Assad toady and all that kind of stuff, right?
God,
so
smearing.
Yeah. So, and she's not perfect either. But this is, so I don't know. Like, I don't know if there's going to ever be, I mean, this is why I do like some people, like, some of my favorite journalists, even though I may disagree with them politically, are of the left, and they're Matt Taibbi and Aaron Mate, right? Because they are reflective, and they're like, until the left takes a look at itself, the politicians and some of the people, right? Like, there's not going to be a change. They're just going to, it's just going to keep getting sillier and sillier and worse and worse. And like, we can all disagree about stuff. Like, to me, it's just like, there won't really be like awakening or freedom until people recognize that just the idea of government in and of itself is a tyrannical idea, right? The word actually means mind control. I understand that not everybody sees it the way I do, or is where I'm at in their own evolution. I'm not saying that mine is more evolved or less evolved or whatever, but like, until there's some level of self-reflection and recognition, you know, of mistakes that have been made and beliefs that are not well-founded, and you know, there's not going to be, I mean, it's just going to keep getting, it's going to be, you know, kooky like this. I don't know, you know, and I would say that, you know, there's not, you know, there's a lot of people on the right that aren't self-reflective. There's a lot of people in all the camps that aren't self-reflective. And, you know, I mean, that's one of the things that, you know, as you grow and mature spiritually as a human being, I think that's probably the most important thing, is your ability to self-reflect and to, rather than like punishing yourself, which will then in a harsh way, which then usually leads you right back to the same behavior, to really like reflect and sit with it for a bit and then choose a different mode of behavior next time, right? And that's really the only way that progress is made.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the video that I just put out yesterday, which was response to the responses that I was getting from my Adam Schiff video, was just inviting people to check in with themselves when they're having conversations. Like, are you trying to be right, or are you seeking to understand? Because if you're trying to be right and make the other person wrong, then your ego's driving you and you're going to get nowhere. If you're seeking to understand, then you're open to growth. And I think what we're up against is just that, like, we're not a very evolved species. We're just not that awake. And like, that just is what it is, you know, like you can't shame people for being at their level of consciousness. It's unfortunate.
Yeah.
But the other thing that I wanted to say that kind of ties into this is, like, there are so many people I know, Emily, who are pretty awake and who've done their due diligence as far as what's really going on with vax, what's really going on with climate crisis. And, you know, they have a pretty broad understanding, but there's a wall when it comes to the pedophilia and the organ harvesting. It's too dark, and they refuse to let themselves go there. And there's a part of me that, you know, that bums me out, because we have to look at this. And then there's the other reality of, like, maybe they're just not mature, resourced enough to really be able to handle it without having a full-fledged meltdown. And I think that's, like, I do think that's a big piece of what we're up against, because that's the big giant skeleton in our country's closet, is how much is, you know, our whole planet's closet. And until people are brave enough to look at it, it's not going to stop.
Well, I mean, I think you're right. I mean, it's the thing that allows all of the other things to exist, because that's the control. That's what they use to control people, is awareness around that, whether they have dirt on somebody or whether that person is just aware of something else and then they're at risk because they know something. I'll say this, and I can just speak from my own experience. I was having something related to it this morning. Part of it is just, it isn't just the looking at the darkness and being prepared to accept that this is also a part of the human experience, unfortunately, and that if we're going to have to be much more aware and responsible for ourselves and our behavior and the behavior of those around us and what we allow for children and blah, 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 if we're going to stop. It just requires a lot of taking responsibility, but it also is, once the door to that opens, the things that you see, it never ends, right? There's no end to it in terms of, like, you know, so for me, when I started opening, you know, I started going down the rabbit hole, and then I started to discover that, you know, at a certain point became my awareness about what had happened in my particular circumstance, and that it wasn't an anomaly, and it was related to this other thing. And why is it happening with, you know, like this gymnastics thing is related, this shit is related to so many weird things. And this morning I was reading a book about the inner earth, right? And it led me back to the pedophilia and the gymnastics. And so there doesn't come a point like where it's just like, okay, well, I know it and I dealt with it and now it's over and I never have to worry about it again.
Right.
There does come a point where you're like, okay, like you can accept it as part of like what's interesting or things to making sense and whatever, but it's not like, okay, that we've dealt with that issue and now I can get rid of it. And so it's an unpleasantness that threatens to stick around for a long time, as opposed to an unpleasantness that can be solved by passing a law or by closing a factory or a whatever, right? This is something that's going to take generations to deal with. And so there's not an endpoint that is soon for the ramifications that come from it, right? And I think people are, that scares people.
I think it terrifies them. I think it's so overwhelming. And I also think I agree with everything you said, but I think another piece is for people to look at like, wow, if so many people are doing this, then I need to look at what in me could potentially be.
Yep.
And I don't think people are willing to look at the extent of darkness that we all carry.
Yep. This is, I mean, you know, we all have the potential for, you know, like, I'm not saying she's wonderful, but for just like symbolically for the behavior of someone like a Mother Teresa or whatever. And we all have the potential for the behavior of Hitler and everything in between.
100%.
Right. And Yeah, and that's something that people, it's a hard, and only the recognition of that and the integration of both sides, right, of the shadow self and the light self and whatever, can like bring you to the place of where you can be a self-reflective human being who is able to change your behavior and therefore the where you're going, right?
Yeah.
Like that kind of thing. And it's hard. And it's like, sometimes it just sucks because, sometimes it means that, and there's a lot of less instant gratification and satisfaction.
It's so brutal to look at our shit, and yet it's crucial. Yeah, exactly like you said, to integrate, to walk through the world whole, knowing all aspects ourselves, and also gleaning the benefits of all aspects, because every shadow has a gift.
Yep, absolutely. So in the darkest poop is the best manure. So, who's the best fertilizer? Sorry, the darkest, like the compost. Somebody I know always says that, like the stinkiest compost grows the best vegetables. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
Yeah. All right. Anything else you want to hit on before we go?
Just that I'm so happy you're wearing your Madonna shirt.
Right. I love my Madonna shirts. That's all a mixed bag too, like everything else. She's neither a sinner nor a saint, but she's both. All right. You can find Dani at DaniKatz.com. You can find me on Off Planet Radio or on Facebook at Emily Moyer. We will see you guys next time. Happy 2020, kids.
Happy 2020.
Bye.